It all started with the phone. Not her regular one, of course. This was a sleek, black device I'd never seen before. I found it tucked away in the back of her closet, under piles of clothes she barely touched. Maybe I wouldn't have looked there if it weren't for the nagging feeling in my gut, a feeling that had been growing for months, ever since Jessica started spending more time at P Diddy's recording studio. Jessica was always chasing the dream. From the moment we got together, she talked about becoming a famous singer. And I believed in her. I really did. She's got talent, no question about that. But after that first invite to record a demo at the studio, something shifted. The studio sessions stretched late into the night. And not just once or twice. This became a pattern. She'd come home exhausted, but with this strange energy, like she'd been somewhere she wasn't supposed to be. I tried to brush it off at first. Maybe it was just the stress of trying to make it big. Maybe I was overthinking it, being paranoid. But the late nights became more frequent, the lies easier for her to tell. And then there was the distance between us, growing wider every day. I knew something was wrong. I just didn't know how deep it went. The phone was my first real clue. It wasn't easy to find. Jessica had been careful, making sure her tracks were covered. But nobody's perfect. I don't even remember why I was in the closet that night, maybe looking for something of mine she'd borrowed. That's when I saw it. My first thought was, why does she need another phone? I picked it up, my hands trembling. I knew this was the kind of thing you don't just stumble across unless there's something to hide. My heart was pounding as I tried to turn it on. Of course, it was locked. For a second, I considered putting it back, pretending I hadn't seen it, but the gnawing feeling inside wouldn't let me. I sat down on the bed and stared at it, my mind racing. If she had nothing to hide, why would she need a secret phone? This wasn't just a burner phone. It was expensive, the kind of thing you use when you don't want anyone knowing what you're really up to. I tried every password I could think of. Her birthday, our anniversary, nothing. I was about to give up when I tried her favorite number, 112. The phone unlocked. My breath caught in my throat. What I saw confirmed my worst fears. My hands were shaking as the screen lit up, revealing a flood of messages. They weren't from people I recognized. No names like Mom or Bestie popping up. Just anonymous numbers, and the occasional name that made my blood run cold. Studio manager, P Diddy team, VIP guest list. I started scrolling through the texts, my heart hammering in my chest. The messages were short, cryptic. At first, they seemed like nothing, just casual chat, like anyone would have with coworkers or friends. But as I read deeper, the meaning behind them became darker, more disturbing. Tonight's party is invite only. Keep it low-key. No personal phones. We'll send the car at midnight. Come dressed to impress. One message from the studio manager stood out. The one that made everything start to crumble around me. Don't forget your studio phone. No pics, no posting. This stays between us. I realized the phone wasn't just for music contacts. It was for something else. Something secret. Something I was never meant to see. This wasn't about Jessica chasing her dream. This was something darker, something much more dangerous. These weren't just late-night studio sessions. This was about parties, private, elite parties for the rich and famous. The kind that were kept hidden from the public, where rules didn't exist, and morals were as flexible as you wanted them to be. I had heard rumors about these kinds of parties before. You see stuff in the tabloids about wild celebrity gatherings, but you always assume it's exaggerated. You think it's just gossip. But here it was, in black and white on my wife's secret phone. It felt like I'd been punched in the gut. Jessica wasn't just at the studio to record songs. She was getting deeper into a world that I had no part in, a world that thrived on exclusivity and secrecy. And apparently, she was in. I scrolled further, feeling like I was watching my marriage unravel in real time. There were messages about special guests, people flying in from LA, from New York, names I recognized from the tabloids. And there, buried among the messages, was the one that shattered any last hope I had left. Thanks for last night. You were amazing. Can't wait for round 2. I dropped the phone, like it had burned my hand. My pulse was in my ears, loud, blocking out everything else. This couldn't be real. Jessica, my wife, the woman I had built a life with, was this the person she had become? Or had she always been like this, and I was too blind to see it? I picked up the phone again, needing to know more, even though every part of me screamed to stop. There were more texts, photos too. Nothing explicit, just candid shots of people I knew. Musicians, actors, people Jessica had no business being around. And yet, there she was, right in the middle of it all, looking like she belonged. There was a new message, time-stamped from earlier that night. It was from the same number that had thanked her for last night's performance. Got something special planned for tonight. You'll love it. Wear that dress again. The black one. I felt like I was going to be sick. I sat there, staring at the phone in my trembling hands, unable to process the avalanche of information. The messages, the secret meetings, the double life Jessica had been living. It was all too much. But what really sent a chill down my spine wasn't just her betrayal. It was the growing presence of one name that kept popping up in her conversations. P Diddy. The moment I saw his name, it hit me like a brick. This wasn't just Jessica fooling around behind my back. She was part of something bigger, something darker, and it was all tied to him. For months, there had been rumors swirling in the tabloids, whispers of exclusive soirees at Diddy's studio. Of course, it was all brushed off as just gossip. Wild stories about famous musicians, shady after-hours parties, and VIP guests no one could name. People love a scandal, but I never thought those stories had anything to do with me. Until now, I scrolled through more of the texts, my heart pounding harder with each passing message. Jessica had become a regular at these parties. See you at Diddy's tonight? One text read, from someone named Marcus. Got a spot saved for you. Another message from a contact simply labeled event manager instructed her on what to wear, what to bring, and, most disturbingly, how to act. Be charming. Stay cool. Diddy loves new faces, but don't say too much. You know the deal. I felt the bile rising in my throat. This wasn't just about partying. It was about power. Jessica wasn't just a guest at these events. She was a player. And the more I read, the more I realized just how deep she was in. But it wasn't until I found the photos that I truly understood how far things had gone. Hidden in a folder on the phone, cleverly disguised under an app for studio samples, were dozens of pictures. Some of them were harmless enough. Shots of Jessica at the studio, sitting with producers, laughing with other artists. But as I swiped through, the photos took a darker turn. The smiles became forced. The settings became more intimate. And then, there were the photos of her with him. P Diddy. In the first photo, they were at what looked like a private dinner. Jessica was seated next to him, smiling, her hand resting lightly on his arm. In another, they were at one of his infamous parties, surrounded by people I didn't recognize but who exuded wealth and status. And then, there was the one that broke me completely. A candid shot of Jessica sitting on Diddy's lap, her head resting on his shoulder, laughing like she didn't have a care in the world. That's when I realized the full extent of it. She wasn't just attending these parties. She was involved with him. The man I had admired from a distance, the mogul whose music Jessica had played for years, the legend she idolized. He was the one pulling her deeper into this world of secrets and lies. And Jessica had fallen for it, hook, line, and sinker. For hours, I just sat there, my mind spinning, trying to wrap my head around what I had uncovered. The phone in my hand felt like a bomb, ready to blow my entire life apart. I wanted to confront her right then and there, demand answers, scream at her for lying to me, for betraying me. But what was the point? I knew everything I needed to know. Jessica had chosen this life, chosen him, over me. Still, I wasn't ready to give up just yet. I had to know how deep this really went. I started piecing together a timeline. From the messages, it seemed like Jessica's involvement in these parties had begun months ago, not long after she'd first started recording at Diddy's studio. At first, it was small, just a few invites to late-night sessions, a party here and there. But it quickly escalated. The more time she spent at the studio, the more she was pulled into Diddy's inner circle. The secret phone, the cryptic messages, it was all part of the game. And I wasn't even a footnote in that game. That night, Jessica came home late again. She didn't even try to hide it anymore. When I asked her how the studio was, she gave me the same rehearsed answer she always did, long exhausting. But it's all going to be worth it. I didn't say anything. I couldn't. I just watched her as she slipped into our bed, my mind filled with images of those parties, of her with Diddy, of everything she had been hiding from me. The next morning, she was gone before I even woke up. Off to the studio again, no doubt. But I had made a decision. I wasn't going to let this slide. I needed answers, real answers, not the lies Jessica had been feeding me for months. That's when I decided to dig deeper. I wasn't going to confront her just yet. First, I needed more proof. I needed to know exactly what these parties were about and what Jessica was really doing when she said she was working late. I spent the next few days preparing. It wasn't hard to find more about Diddy's so-called studio parties. The internet is full of speculation, wild stories about what really goes on behind closed doors at these exclusive events. But finding hard evidence? That was another story. I knew I couldn't just walk into one of these parties and expect to get the truth. These events were locked down, invite only, with security tighter than a presidential gala. But I had one thing in my favor, Jessica's secret phone. Through the messages, I learned that attendees of these parties were given special passes, physical and digital ones. The physical passes were custom wristbands, handed out just before the party. The digital ones? Well, that's where the phone came in. Apparently, everyone who attended had to use a studio-issued phone, one that was linked to the event's encrypted network. It was a way to keep everything under wraps. No leaks, no social media, no outside interference. I had her phone. I had access to her messages. If I played my cards right, I could figure out where the next party was and, maybe, get a glimpse of what Jessica was really involved in. It didn't take long for the opportunity to present itself. A message popped up on the phone a few days later, inviting Jessica to another one of Diddy's infamous parties. Saturday night. Same spot. You know the drill. It was followed by another text. Special guest this time. You'll want to be there. This was it. My chance to find out the truth. But what was I going to do? Was I really about to walk into one of these parties, pretending like I belonged there? Or should I just confront Jessica and get it over with? I didn't know. All I knew was that I had to do something, or I was going to lose my mind. I had a plan, though I wasn't sure how far I'd take it. The party was on Saturday, and from what I could gather through the messages, this wasn't just another studio session. This was going to be bigger, exclusive guests, high-profile figures, and as always, no outsiders allowed. Jessica hadn't mentioned the party to me. That wasn't a surprise. She never did anymore. Her excuses were well rehearsed by now. But this time, I wasn't going to sit at home waiting for her to come back with another fake smile and lies about how exhausting the night had been. I had her phone, and more importantly, I had the invitation. The message was clear. Come to the back entrance. No personal phones. Be discreet. Security will handle everything. I was about to step into a world I didn't belong in, a world that had swallowed my wife whole. And yet, the sick part of me needed to see it for myself. I needed to know how far she had gone, how far she was willing to go to make it. On Saturday, Jessica left in the late afternoon, dressed to the nines in a black dress that I recognized. It was the one from the photos on her secret phone, the one she had worn at one of Diddy's earlier parties. I watched her go, feeling that familiar mixture of anger and heartbreak. She didn't even say goodbye, just grabbed her purse and disappeared out the door. As soon as she left, I put my plan into motion. I had no wristband, no real pass to get in, but the phone in my hand was my key. According to the texts, all I had to do was show up at the designated entrance, flash the phone, and I'd be let in. If anyone asked, I could claim to be handling something for Jessica, an assistant, a driver, whatever excuse would work. My hands were sweating as I rehearsed my cover story in my head. This was insane. I could get caught. Worse, I could end up in a world of trouble if they found out who I really was. But I was desperate. Desperate to know what Jessica had become. I arrived at the address about an hour after Jessica had left. The location was discreet. No flashy signs, no neon lights. Just an unassuming building in a quiet part of the city. The kind of place you'd never notice if you weren't looking for it. I parked a block away and approached the back entrance, the phone clenched in my hand like a lifeline. The security was tight, just like I'd expected. Two large men stood by the door, scanning the few people who had been invited. They all looked like they belonged. High class, confident, the kind of people used to getting whatever they wanted. I felt out of place already, my nerves getting the better of me. But there was no turning back now. When I reached the door, I pulled out the phone, holding it up for the guards to see. They glanced at the screen, then at me. For a moment, I thought they were going to stop me, ask me who the hell I was. But they just nodded and stepped aside, letting me through. I was in. The moment I stepped inside, I felt like I had crossed into another dimension. The place was lavish, dripping with money and power. Music pulsed softly through the air, a subtle beat that set the tone for the night. Dim lights cast a golden glow over everything, making the space feel both intimate and unreal. And the people, these weren't just industry types. These were A-listers, celebrities I had only ever seen on TV or in magazines. Actors, musicians, models. And there, mingling among them, was Jessica. She was standing near the bar, laughing at something a man was saying. He looked familiar, probably another producer or some big shot manager. Jessica looked different, not just because of the dress or the way her hair was done. It was in her eyes. She looked alive, like she was in her element, feeding off the attention. And why wouldn't she be? She was surrounded by everything she'd ever wanted. Fame, fortune, access to a world that was just out of reach for people like me. I felt a knot tighten in my stomach as I watched her, a part of me hoping she'd see me, realize I was there. But she didn't. She was too busy laughing, too caught up in the excitement of it all. I wandered further into the party, keeping to the edges, trying to blend in. It wasn't easy. Everyone seemed to know each other, the way they moved, the way they spoke. It was like watching a different species. They all had that same air of untouchability. And here I was, a nobody, just a husband trying to figure out what the hell had happened to his life. Then, I saw him. P Diddy himself. He was across the room, surrounded by people, his aura commanding attention. He was in the middle of a conversation, but even from where I stood, I could feel his presence. The man was magnetic, the kind of guy who could make or break careers with a single word. And here was my wife, just a few feet away, playing the game, trying to get closer to him, closer to everything she thought she deserved. I don't know what I expected to feel. Maybe anger, maybe fear. But standing there, watching it all unfold, all I felt was numb. This was the world Jessica had chosen. This was the life she wanted, and there was no room in it for me. But then, something happened that changed everything. The music shifted, becoming more intense, as if signaling that the night was about to enter its next phase. People started moving toward a set of double doors at the far end of the room, and I followed, keeping my distance but staying close enough to see what was happening. Behind those doors was a second, more private area. This wasn't the kind of party you read about in magazines. This was different, exclusive, hidden. I hesitated at the threshold, unsure if I should continue. But curiosity and the need for answers pushed me forward. I stepped into the room, and what I saw confirmed my worst fears. The atmosphere was darker, more intimate. The lights were dimmer, the music a low hum that seemed to vibrate through the walls. People weren't just talking anymore. They were indulging in each other, in substances, in pleasures that I couldn't even begin to describe. It was the kind of scene that you hear about in rumors, whispered scandals, but never really believe exists. But it was real, and Jessica was part of it. She wasn't in the middle of it, not yet, but I saw her standing at the edge of the room, watching, her eyes wide with a mix of excitement and something else, something darker. She looked like she was waiting for her moment, waiting to be pulled in. And then, I saw him again. Diddy. He walked up to her, casual but deliberate. He leaned in close, whispering something in her ear, his hand resting on her lower back. Jessica smiled, a nervous, almost shy smile. But she didn't pull away. She leaned into him. That's when I knew. It wasn't just the parties. It wasn't just the lies. Jessica had crossed a line, and there was no coming back. The room felt like it was closing in on me, the pulse of the music vibrating through my bones as I watched Jessica drift further into this twisted world. The dim lighting barely illuminated the figures lounging on velvet couches, their bodies languid and intertwined. There was a haze of smoke hanging in the air, something intoxicating, thick with more than just alcohol. Conversations were whispered, laughter sharp and cutting, as if everyone here was sharing secrets they didn't want the outside world to know. I could barely comprehend what I was seeing. People were draped over each other, their hands roaming freely. It wasn't the kind of party where anyone was worried about being caught. This was a playground for indulgence, for excess, where anything could happen and no one cared about the consequences. And Jessica was on the edge of it, watching with wide eyes, her breath shallow, as if she were waiting for the moment to dive in. The room felt electric, dangerous. There was a sense that anything could happen and that anything was allowed to happen. As I stepped closer, I saw more than I ever wanted to see. Hidden in the shadows, away from prying eyes, people were slipping into private rooms, their whispers turning into something darker, more intimate. It was a slow, unfolding horror. This wasn't just a party. It was a descent into something I could barely recognize. Jessica was standing with a group now, her back to me. One of the women next to her, someone I vaguely recognized from the tabloids, was whispering into her ear, her hand resting possessively on Jessica's arm. The way she touched her, like she was pulling her into something, made my blood run cold. I could see it in Jessica's face, that hunger, that reckless desire to be accepted, to be part of this. I pushed through the crowd, my heart pounding in my chest. I didn't care who was watching. I didn't care what these people thought of me. All I could think about was getting Jessica out of there, away from this place, before she disappeared completely into this world. Jessica! I called out, my voice sharp, cutting through the haze. She turned, her eyes widening when she saw me. For a moment, I saw fear flash across her face, but it was gone as quickly as it appeared. She stood taller, her expression hardening into something colder, more distant. Like I wasn't even her husband, just some stranger interrupting her night. "What the hell are you doing here?" she hissed, her voice low but filled with venom. I glanced around the room, seeing the eyes on us, the way people whispered behind their hands, amused by the scene I was making. But I didn't care. All I saw was her, the woman I had loved, standing in the middle of this twisted place, completely lost to me. "We need to talk," I said, my voice shaking with anger, frustration, heartbreak. "Right now." She glanced around, clearly embarrassed, like I was the one who was out of line, like I didn't belong. "This isn't the time for this, okay? You don't understand." "Don't understand?" I snapped, my voice rising despite the warning looks from people nearby. "I've seen enough, Jessica. I know what's going on. You've been lying to me for months, sneaking around, going to these parties, these things." Her eyes flickered with something, a brief flash of guilt, but then she steeled herself again. "It's not what you think." I could barely contain my rage. "Then what is it, Jessica? You've been lying to me for months. You think I don't know what's been happening at these parties? What you've been doing?" She sighed, crossing her arms defensively. "This is how the industry works. You don't get it. I have to be here. I have to make these connections if I want to get anywhere. You don't just get famous by staying at home." I stared at her, barely recognizing the woman in front of me. "At what cost, Jessica? What are you giving up for this? For him? For these people?" She didn't answer, but the way she averted her eyes, the way her jaw tightened, it told me everything I needed to know. She was in deep, too deep, and this wasn't just about getting ahead in her career. This was about indulging in something far darker, something she couldn't pull herself out of even if she wanted to. Suddenly, I felt someone brush past me, their voice a soft whisper in my ear. "You should be careful," the woman said, her smile barely masking the threat underneath. "Some things are better left unseen." I turned to see her disappear into the crowd, her words hanging in the air like a warning. There was no mistaking it. This wasn't just about Jessica making connections. There was something more sinister going on here, something dangerous. And now, I was a part of it, whether I wanted to be or not. I looked back at Jessica, my heart breaking all over again. "I hope it's worth it," I said, my voice hollow. "I hope this is everything you wanted." She didn't respond. She just watched me, her expression unreadable. And that's when I knew it was over. Whatever we had, whatever we used to be, was gone. I turned and walked away, feeling the weight of the eyes on my back. But I didn't care anymore. Jessica had made her choice. The cold air hit me as I stepped outside, the weight of the night crushing down on me with every step I took away from that place. My heart was pounding, my hands still shaking from the confrontation. But more than anything, I felt numb. The woman I had loved, the life we had built together, it was all over. And the worst part? I wasn't sure if she even cared. I got into my car and sat there for a long time, staring at the dashboard. I kept replaying the night in my head, over and over, trying to make sense of it all. How had things fallen apart so completely? How had Jessica become this stranger, this person willing to throw everything away for a taste of fame, for a chance to be part of something so dark, so twisted? As I sat there, my phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out, expecting to see a message from Jessica, some attempt at an explanation, maybe even an apology. But it wasn't from her. It was from an unknown number. Best to keep what you saw tonight to yourself. People like us don't play nice. My blood ran cold. I didn't need to ask who had sent it. The message was clear. Stay quiet, or there would be consequences. This world, Jessica's new world, wasn't just about wild parties and secret phones. It was about control, power, and the people who would do anything to keep their secrets buried. I threw the phone onto the passenger seat, feeling the weight of it all pressing down on me. This wasn't just about Jessica anymore. This was about something much bigger, something that I couldn't fight on my own. The next morning, I made my decision. I wasn't going to confront Jessica again. There was no point. She had made her choice, and I had to make mine. I packed a few things, just enough to get me by for a while, and left the house without a word. I didn't leave a note, didn't send her a text. She would figure it out soon enough. There was no use in trying to save what was already gone. As I closed the door behind me, I felt an overwhelming sense of relief. For the first time in months, I wasn't weighed down by lies, by secrets, by the twisted web Jessica had dragged me into. I was free, and as I drove away from the life we had once shared, I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't looking back.